à tous. Nous sommes ravis de vous retrouver aussi nombreux malgré ce jour de grève. Alors, je suis Caroline Moulin-Chouard, je suis déléguée technique du CRIP et je suis heureuse de vous retrouver chaque année pour parler de cybersécurité. Ce matin, nous allons parler du SOC et plus précisément du SOC face au cloud, puisque c'est le grand sujet du FIC cette année. Eh bien, quels sont les nouveaux enjeux que le SOC va rencontrer en couvrant le cloud? Quelles sont les nouvelles formes d'organisation que nous allons rencontrer? Quels sont les outils et également les process? Eh bien, beaucoup de questions se posent par rapport à ces sujets et nous allons les aborder ce matin avec 4 de nos intervenants. Bonjour à tous. Merci d'être là.
Bonjour.
Alors, je vais commencer par Max. Hello, Max. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Max, you are Deputy Group CISO for N26. A few words about your career and your bank.
All right. A few words about my career. I started as a consultant in information security, then went through different markets and branches. Worked then at Sky Germany as their security architect, and went to UniCredit Bank as their deputy CISO, and now switched to N26 as their deputy group CISO. Here, N26 is a so-called neobank, which is completely cloud native. We don't have any physical branches. We do everything digitally through our app and our website. And so this is a whole new challenge.
Yes, we will speak about it. Thanks a lot, Max. Farah Rigal.
Farah Rigal, you are Deputy Head of Global Cybersecurity Services for Eviden. For those who didn't have a look at the program recently, you haven't changed your company, but your company has changed name and it dates back only 24 hours. Absolutely. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about it. So Atos, the world leader of managed security system and European champion of calculators, create Eviden, this brand, with our digital cloud big data activities and obviously cybersecurity too. So we managed to hear a few words said by Jean-Philippe this morning, and we'll deal with that later on this morning. Cyril Aziza, your group CISO at Kering, you built the SOC of major outfits. You worked for the Crédit Agricole, Veolia, L'Oréal, and I could continue, the list is long, but a bit of your background, which was at the international, and also can you give us a few words about Kering too? Yes, Caroline. I'm head of cybersecurity of the Kering Group, and I've got an experience of more than 20 years in CISOs in international environment. The SOC is one of my key topics. I have the opportunity to practice that, building few SOC and certs in a different group. Kering, in a few words, it's a big luxury group, famous luxury group. Kering comes from KER, the house in Britain language, and Kering for the international dimension is the head office carrying a brand like Gucci, Saint Laurent, and you'll have a look if you want the name of the 15 brands that we convey. We'll talk infrastructure with you quite a lot on the SOC, and you represent the CISAN and the cyber defense, the operational cyber defense college, and you are an engineer, cyber engineer security. You accompany the companies in the management of their risk and vulnerability. A bit of your background, which is also on an international scale. Delighted to meet you here today. Thank you for being here. In a few words, today I am engineer at Kennigan, publisher, leader in risk management, cyber exposure, etc. Before being with Enable, I worked with management and design of SOCs. I mean, vulnerability management is part of the SOC element. I worked around the world. I was fortunate to work in the States, Dubai, Middle East, and in France right now. Different regulations, different challenges to face, and it's a good experience to share. Now the floor is yours. I mean, we've got two questions for you, the audience, now that you know us better. Who doesn't have a SOC in the audience? I mean, who doesn't have a SOC? Can you put your hand up? Yeah, a few. And those with a SOC, so the big majority, I would say, yes, quite visibly so. Other question now. Does your SOC cover the cloud? Hands up if that's the case. Not yet. Well, this is interesting. Interesting for us to actually see your position on that. First part, we're going to review the different challenges, those who do not cover the cloud with your SOC. Sarah, I'm going to start with you, because if we look back, which is always a very interesting thing to do, how did the SOC progress when following the major transformation of cybersecurity, the progression of quick threats, and the major transformation of usages, big data, and obviously the cloud? You're totally right there. I mean, cybersecurity and the SOC in particular is not going through its first adaptation, first adjustment. Those who've been in the business for quite a few years, I mean, we've experienced different generations to adjust best to the evolution of the threats. And as far as the technology is concerned too. So the SOC in particular has been given some new goals, changing the tools and adapting them. So to run through history a little bit, I mean, maybe the people who are under 20 won't have known that, but the SOC, we could ask it to do some log review in the year 2000, and that was enough then. We placed the facts and then we reviewed. But that's just more than, and more by necessity, and also because the tools enabled us to do that. The SOC then opened up to forecast with the emergence of analytics and the Intel intensification. So that's between 2010 and 2015. And why stop as we're well on the way? Why do that when we know that there's an imminent risk, imminent threat? So why not switch to the response, to prescribe it with the prescriptive analytics? But why not coordinate this response or design it? It's the same timeline, this very timeline actually, that's been through those different progressions as part of the SOC mission. And I'm not saying everything that we expect from a SOC today. I mean, there are a lot of Connect Annex services which have grafted themselves on this to capitalize on the knowledge of the threats. And it's along this timeline that came up the different elements of technological evolution. The cloud is not stricto sensu one for the organizations used to virtualization and use of private cloud between 2015 and 2020. So technologically, the plasticity are things which are not really true. But what is truly new is the fluidity, the communities controlling the processes, which are not the same teams anymore. There's not this control. There's no longer this control, this visibility, and this centralization. So I think that this is the true challenge, actually. So an important word, I mean, the coordination, orchestration. I mean, we've seen a few people who don't have a SOC yet, and I mean, they'll soon have one, I'm sure. They're in the room here, and there are also a lot of people remotely. There's a question. Let's put things on the flat. Let's say there's CIAN, DN, KIR, MDR, a lot of technical words. There's a lot of confusions in those words. I mean, in a few words, very quickly, how can we throw some light on these key technical terms, the difference between the SOC and those technical terms? Cyril, specialist of the SOC? Just to throw some light. I'm going to take a few that you quoted, but if you want to progress in cybersecurity, is a world of acronyms, and you've got to learn them. And there are a lot of marketing concepts also. Those marketing concepts are defined by the Gartner, but not only. I mean, some companies, because of their innovation, define others to SOC versus EDR, XDR. They are words that I use when the EDR is like the antivirus. It's a tool that you use, and it blocks things up, and then it sends warnings to the SOC. What is the SOC? The SOC is the sum total of the tools, processes, and human resources that will collect and get some information, events, and warnings, and make decisions based on what they got. It can be detecting an incident and will decide to react, or will get rid of the doubt. The SOC is a sum total of things with complex architectures, teams, processes. We hear about CERT or CCIRT, which is the organizational part, which helps us to bring a response to an incident. CTI, Cyber Threat Intel. I mean, acronyms, we could give you thousands. And XDR is just X for an infinite number of technology in DR. DR is point detection and response. How can you do detection and response elsewhere than on the EDR? So I've got the responsibility to talk about the NDR, because we manage those platforms and those solutions. So the NDR is the managed part with a big automatic layer and artificial intelligence, but also with the help of resources, people. And the acronyms are fine. I mean, it makes life easier. I mean, it takes less room. But at the same time, the confusion of a SOC, or when we say that we've got a CM, two people are managing it, we've got a SOC, that's not the case. The people part is a very important part, and that's the organizational part, which is very important. It's like a corporate project. It's not buying a couple of tools because you've got the money for it, that you've got a SOC, and that's easy. Acronyms are all well and good, but it's a people, process, technology part that you've got to focus on, and that you've got to develop and keep and protect. We'll deal with that later on. Max?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I still had the translation service on.
Okay, we were just saying that we have a lot of words, technical words like XDR, and we have made a point on these words. Okay, I hope you've got the translation.
Okay. Yeah, I got the translation about the discussion on EDR, XDR, CCERT,
yes.
SOC, or that what Badr just said about the people, processes, and techniques to set this up and to have a proper SOC. And I fully agree.
Okay. Badr, maintenant, quand on migre...
Now, when we migrate in the cloud, we migrate clearly for flexibility purposes, for power of calculation. What does that change for the SOC? What are the advantages and the disadvantages? I mean, we can imagine. As Farah said, I mean, the cloud part is what we used to do. what we had as IS internal platform. That's something that we put on a hoster that is calculated on a broader base. But in terms of advantage, which are numerous one, agility, deployment, and so on, the quicker way to put in production, the status of health of the machine is also important, but it's new. When we had 100% process, it was my infra, my responsibility. Today, when we use cloud, if we read the conditions, we know that the platform is the responsibility of the host, but the services, the security, and what you put on it is your responsibility. So we're going from a model of responsibility with only one person to a shared responsibility mode. And that's something which is new. As far as security is concerned, it's difficult to share the responsibility because somebody must be responsible and accountable on the task. So that's my scope, and you've got to be able to protect that. As far as the cloud is concerned, the challenges are huge because vulnerability or the leak of the detection part is not just related to a CVE or a configuration, which is a non-logical one. It can go further. It might be a bad segmentation or a macro segmentation that doesn't work well, but the cloud, as far as the responsibility is concerned, is very important, and the stakes and the consequences for any CISO or team managing the risk, we can't look at it in the same way as we saw the other part. We will never repeat it enough when we're talking about cloud. It is a matter of shared responsibility. Some organizations are too quick to forget about it. Cyril, you build the SOC strategy in a lot of large corporations in France and in English, at the international. What is your view of those new challenges and stakes for the SOC? Well, there are lots of things, but I'm going to try and give you a few elements to answer that. The SOC is not a magical object. It's technology grouping up all the activities of a data center. So it's a very complex technology which covers a lot of different functionalities. So concretely, when we're talking about SOC and cloud, those different clouds, AWS of Amazon, Azure by Microsoft, Google Cloud Platform, Alibaba Cloud, OVH. So when we're talking about cloud, if we're talking about a specific cloud, there are a specific concept, and we've got to learn precisely what we're talking about. That's the first point. And I hear a lot of people talking about super concepts, but when we're dealing with security, there's technology. It's got to be made safe. There are events happening. They've got to be detected, and a way to manage those events and the warnings vary from one supplier to the next. So we've got to learn about this technology, and most of the cloud suppliers have training programs which are free, accessible to all. So those who don't know how to deal with it, I mean, go and learn about the cloud technology or technologies your corporation use, and it's important to get trained on that, yes. Then, as we've got specific technology, it changes the skills. I mean, talking about the SOC more specifically, we changed the skills because, as was mentioned before, the SOC has gone through evolutions through time. It started being very close to the infrastructures, and with the cloud coming up, I mean, we're closer to applicative blocks. That means that the skills to get a SOC to work based on the infra and with the shared responsibility model, I mean, infrastructures are managed by the cloud operator, or the underlying infrastructures are. So we will go up on the layers and focus on the applicative bricks or the middleware, and the activity of the SOC will be changed because of this new approach and this focus on the different layers. Then, we talk a lot about competence because, I mean, dealing with detection, bringing a response to an incident in SOC needs some kind of competence level. The cloud, depending on which cloud we're on, we're going to need different types of competence. If you say cloud, that means automation, orchestration. But automation and orchestration, I mean, that's not magical. I mean, you need to have the right skills and competence to do that. So when we were just collecting logs in a SOC very infra, in a SOC where we're going to look for automation, we're going to need development competences because we've got to interface ourselves with API and get this automation going. That means development, scripting. I mean, we can rely on third parties, but we won't have the necessary agility. Another point which for me seems key is that the cloud goes much faster. What does that mean? I mean, that means we can start a server with just 3 clicks, couple of seconds or minute maybe, but that means that we can have attacks which are very fast moving ones, and we've got to react very rapidly too. So to react very quickly, very fast, that means not to have a lot of intermediate people between the intervention and the reaction. I mean, the interventionism or the ability to make modifications in the SOC teams, which are in greater number than what we could see before. In the past, they had an incident, they contacted the IT team and they said, "Cuckoo, there's a problem, can you take action?" Now, depending on the velocity of the attack we're receiving, this response must be almost immediate. Either we've got a blocking procedure doing it instead of a human being doing it, or somebody has got to manage the incident, and it depends then on this person. It's a notion of interventionism. We had in the past a couple of hours to react, but I heard about the 1-10-60 in the US, 1 minute to detect, 10 minutes to contain, and 60 minutes to remedy. And now we're talking about in matters of seconds and at the most minutes. So people say, "Oh, this is marketing." Well, maybe, but you're going to have to level up to face the threat and the attackers. The threat is very quick. Farah, do you want to add on? Yes, I would like to add on to this point because the convergence of cybersecurity businesses and activities and software engineering increase with remediation as code, policy as code, and so on, and give us the opportunity to amplify this factor of reduction and compression of time. And I want to insist on the fact of competence and supporting this transformation with the right level of training and detecting those convergences, and to support that is mighty important in the companies. And it's very emblematic when you're going to talk about as code infrastructure or anything as code. Code means developer. Developer in automation equals CI/CD. We've got to use those acronyms, but I mean, those who are not familiar, CI/CD means development chain, integration chain with security controls which are done automatically with the logic of automation and interfacing between the different resources we use. Just a small point. From what Thierry just explained, the attack surface has changed. We talked about cloud service in itself. Now we've got the infrastructure as code scope. The threat will not be the hosted server, but the code that we'll use to deploy the server on the internet. We used to do detection and internet. The security element and the elements we're going to be able to coordinate on the SOC will come from this source code before the deployment, before the rollout of the solution. More process, more tools to have this layer on the code part, on the cloud part, and to be able to follow the different drifts that we're going to have in the pipeline or remediations which will take place. So going through the cloud, I mean, moving to the cloud is important. You coming from a legacy bound to a cloud native full size N26, what did you identify as the biggest SOC in that environment?
So for me, I guess from coming from a bank like UniCredit, right, which is an established bank since many years, has mainframe servers, local data centers or data centers in various countries, and of course already an established SOC. As a bank, we are regulatory driven, right, or regulatory required to have the proper security in place, which is of course resulting into having a SOC, and the same goes also for N26. The biggest difference here also for me is, as N26, we are again also a cloud native bank. So the biggest challenge in that environment that I am seeing also with the colleagues working directly in the teams is just the pure speed and the number of applications, microservices, and cloud instances that are being developed and deployed and rolled out basically on a day-to-day basis. And the SOC teams keeping up with that, having all of that in scope, and trying to secure all of those, right? To make sure that everything is set up in the proper way, that there is no leakage of data to the outside world. And this stands really in a strong contrast to how companies used to work and develop new solutions in the past, right? Companies used to do waterfall models where they have explicitly detailed in what kind of process step will you involve the SOC to put on your log resources for the SOC to gather them into the SIEM, and then you get a check mark, and then you can continue. Now this is really a lot different in today's world, and I heard that the other colleagues were talking also about CI/CD, right? So this is an immense important topic also for the SOC team, that basically only cover the right part of the CI/CD pipeline, but without having the left part, without having the shift left movement from security within the DevOps environment. Of course, the SOC would be overwhelmed with all the security topics that they would need to work on. So we need to also give certain security responsibilities directly to the developers, right? To make sure that the code that they are rolling out, again, at this immense kind of speed, is at a level already secured, and that the SOC doesn't need to necessarily have all of these little inspections in view as well. And I guess from, again, another differentiator here for me that I saw was that, and this was mentioned as well, the external threat surface has increased dramatically for a cloud native environment, because you have APIs everywhere that you're connecting to with other companies. So these are known. You have cloud instances where you are deploying your productive services, and it's just way easier to spin up something like that nowadays than to acquire a new server that you would need to buy from your, I don't know, internal IT provider, for example. That would take a couple of weeks or months to deliver, and then another weeks and months to set up and everything. Now, just click for people, right? It's just a click. They spin up in cloud instance. It's already set up with Kubernetes or Docker. The base image is there. They can start developing and everything. So the external threat surface, again, has increased dramatically. And also just log sources, right? Because of that, because everything can be spun up so quickly, the dimension of logs that a SOC should ingest and search for security events just grows exponentially. And of course has also another impact on the SOC or the SIEM model, so to speak, because the more logs you are ingesting, of course, that means you need more resources. Good for you if you already made the move into orchestration and automation, right? Because that will cover a lot of your manual labor. But still, the more you onboard, the more you need to look out for. And this also means with whatever SIEM or tool you have in place, most often that this is also an increase in the costs that a SOC or a SIEM is generating, right? So the more you put out there, the more the SOC needs to look out for. This will also increase the overall cost that the SOC will have in place for the company. So I think these really are some of the biggest challenges out there for such a cloud native environment.
Thanks. Cyril wants to complete or reply to you.
Oui, je voulais juste...
I wanted just to add on as to what is said by our colleague. Cloud means explosion or burst of the assets. That means that the surface that has to be kept an eye on or monitored is greater and even more complex, and it's moving also. If we think about the different frameworks, the NIST, the CIS 20, and so forth, we have a static approach, and in this static approach, we want to list the asset first of all. But now we're saying, I mean, cloud assets go up and down, microservice, container, thousands of servers being on or off. So at the image of the security by design or security by default, we should have alerting by design and detection by design. That means that we have to have standard design. Even if there's a new asset, this new asset will be able to feed back information to generate warnings, and the SOC with these different tools will be able to interpret that and to manage.
Gardez le micro.
So keep the microphone, Cyril, because I would like to go further in detail on all these points. So we have the explosion of data and monitoring. You talked about logs, interfaces. What are the specificities that the cloud is introducing in the conception of SOC, of the infra, and of the tools? So if we talk about asset explosion, we talk about log explosion. So this means a number of logs that's constantly increasing. So we have to choose at some stage when we're building SOCs today, because the amount of SOCs that we have to manage is huge. We're talking about tera or even more every day. So these logs, we have to do something with them, and the regulations request that we keep these, and we have to be able to audit them in time. So the volume of logs is huge. So this is the first point that we have to keep in mind. Asset explosion, log volume explosion. So obviously SOC uses logs to nourish itself, so it has to use more and more logs. The second thing is that most of the big companies are not mono-clouds, but are multi-clouds. So there are many studies that show, one of the numbers I have in my head is 90% of most companies have multi-cloud and hybridation on-prem versus cloud, but on-premises versus multi-cloud also. So obviously this generates challenges in terms of architecture. And why is this? As we said earlier, because SOC has as an objective to be able to analyze events and react to these events and treat incidents. However, if we have multi-cloud and we have on-premise environments, the question that we have is, are these logs in one place? Are we keeping them where they're generated? If they're native, do we keep them where they're generated? But if I do this, can I still have a harmonized vision within my SOC? Because if I have an incident, am I attacked on all my clouds, perhaps on a specific perimeter, I have to have the capacity. And as I said earlier, if we have to have only a few minutes to react, I can't say I'm going to connect to A and then B and then C and D, try and understand what happens, and 2 hours later, I'm not clear what happened. It's too late. So really, there are stakes that are high, and there are solutions on the market that allow to have these geo-distributed searches and multi-cloud searches, but obviously they're limited and you lose in performance and so on. In addition, and perhaps you can react on this, we have also huge challenges in terms of regulation, because when we're a big company, if we have an activity in several countries, well, we have to follow these laws, but we also have to follow laws that are not the same. So if working in Europe, we have so many laws, like we have in France, we have a regulator that's active, different agency. But in the US, we have different limits, and in Asia, we have different limitations. And even in terms of where the data can be localized. So where can you localize the data in geo-distributed clouds? So these are problems that, in addition to the explosion of assets, we have really limitations in terms of architecture, and there's no real good answer for this. Depends on the context of the company, the technologies that we choose, the regulations that we have, and so on. We can see this as soon as there's a technology, there's a processes and a human part. Farah, please go ahead. Yes, I wanted to add to the soup of alphabet, the BOIO, which is a tendency that came out of the multi-cloud, bring your own. And when we're talking about protection of data, we're talking about key. But when we're in SOC, we talk about use cases, because companies would like to supervise in the same way the different environments, even though they're different. So they bring their own use cases and they deploy it in the same way on different environments where they're investing. So what I would like to also talk about is another theme, is the part of identity. So Max.
How do you keep track of these things in SOC?
Oh, well, that's a whole can of worms. So, I mean, identity in the SOC. I think the first thing that needs to be made absolutely clear, without having a functioning and working identity and access management framework, SOC is basically powerless, because it is a core ability that you need to have at the heart of your security program and the organization. Because without having a clear instruction on how you are seeing identities, or what is an identity, what is a user, what is an identity, the SOC cannot really work on the level of information that they are ingesting, right? So it's always important that you need to have this kind of governance already set up. And the same goes basically for the point of the transparency on where these identities are moving or resting, so to speak, within your system. So what the SOC also needs to know, of course, is what kind of assets do you have in place, right? So it's all about identity and access management and also asset management. These are the core things that, without having them, the SOC is just having trouble identifying where is the threat, because is this identity allowed to be on this kind of asset or is it not, right? So you need to have this already kind of set up on a rule kind of basis. I think from just, if we go back to identity in itself, going forward for also a SOC, it's highly important that you as a company will need to set up and strongly try to reinforce tools or functions like single sign-on, like multi-factor authentication, because having unregulated identities that can just try to get access to any kind of system or critical system that you have in place, it's just not going to cut it in the future. Again, with the explosion of information, with the explosion of assets, it's the same also with the explosion of identity, right? Because for every asset that you set up, there might be a new identity or a couple of new identities on users, tech users, that are automatically also being set up with these assets and that need to connect and talk with other assets in the environment as well. So how could a SOC really have that all in view? And this is important now to understand, for a SOC to really be able to functioning on an identity level, you need to have these rules set up, or else it is for a SOC not really able to identify unknown identities or unknown assets. and could alert on these for further investigations. And I think one of the biggest challenges within identity in itself, or the transparency in itself as well, especially in that more cloud environment, cloud native environment, is we have in the past defined that within our data centers, everything is basically cut off from the internet, right? And everything that is lying in there, you can talk with each other in your text because it's also very much protected. So no issue here in really analyzing everything that is going on. And now when you have different cloud setups, there are certain rules and regulations out there that tell you everything that goes out, everything that is in transit, and everything that is in rest needs to be encrypted. So now all of a sudden, the SOC is in the middle and needs to identify what kind of data is going back and forth. Because it is encrypted, you need to have some solution in place that is capable of still decrypting that data, or at least certain parts of the data, maybe some metadata, that the SOC then can look at to identify really, is something going on here, or is this all based on our rules? Yeah, so that's also a huge factor for the SOC to measure in.
Thanks. I see two reactions.
Donc, so what Max just said is really important, because identity is really a problem. In the past, we had the Active Directory. It was a directory that was in-house. We know how it was working. We knew how it was functioning. We mastered it. Now we go in the cloud. So when we talk about cloud, we talk about multiple identities, several permissions and profiles. So multi-cloud, multi-profiles, multi-permissions. And again, federating, so we will end up with accumulation of permissions, and we have to follow all of this up. We have to control it. So if the asset is developing so fast that we can't follow how many machines we have on the clouds, how many services, microservices, how many websites, we can even ask ourselves how many domains that we even have. In that case, the identity really becomes difficult, because on a user account, we say, okay, we have an administrator account, which is a service account in each cloud. But in each cloud, we have different permissions. Each account has different permissions. So following these identities is not just detecting information, but it's also correlating. So today, when we talk about identity, perhaps on a platform, it will be admin123. On another platform, it will be Max, and it will be called something else somewhere else. So how can we link the same user that's the same person? Because the data vector, and I come back to this every time, it can be any account of a person from any kind of platform. If we have an account user, we have an email address, and we have the history. We know all the Active Directory in terms of attribution. Keep the microphone, because we'll talk about vulnerabilities. They're really exploding. What's the best approach in this area? So the best approach, it's an easy question, right? Well, vulnerabilities is really a long-term work. It's a process. Yes, absolutely. That's why we're still on the market, because we're specialized in the managing vulnerabilities and visibility. And what is visibility and control? Because we can't secure something that we can't see, that we don't know. So the first step is inventory. It seems easy, basic. We talked in 2000, but we come back to it because a complete inventory means I know my assets, at least. So from there, we go on all the scans. But traditionally, we talked about scanning images and computers and servers because we had on-premise. But now the multitude of attack surfaces, we talk about web applications and cloud machines and configurations and ISA. So these are many tools, many silos of data. So Cyril talked about data in the SOC. We don't want to add even more information to even make correlation even harder. The objective is to reduce the time to detect and time to remediate. So in terms of detection and remediation, we have to be on a seamless program. So we have to have a long-term vision, and to see, okay, we have several attack surfaces, we have several problems, several vulnerabilities in many places. What about consolidation? How can we look at this attack surface, which has multiple assets everywhere, which is whether it's monocloud, multi-cloud, several servers of identity, Active Directory. Well, at the end, we want to have a first level of consolidation. This won't take the place of what SOC is doing, but at least it will consolidate all the information and put in place a priority program to know, today I have 12,000 vulnerabilities. I know that I'm not able to respond to 12,000 vulnerabilities. We have to create priorities. So we have the visibility, we have a context, we will have to prioritize in terms of all the data that we have, the context of the assets, the positioning of the assets, the exposition of the asset, and to be efficient on the management of vulnerabilities, we will have to make some decisions and choices. Now, obviously, this will have to be managed by the global governments, and responsibility in terms of who's doing what and how we're going to do it, and different windows of the patch. Just as an example, and this is a scenario that we've had several times, an industrial client will not have the same frequency of patches as a standard client. So it's normal, and we have to be able to adapt to different rhythms of every client and every sector of activity. So Cyril wanted to react, but as you talk about this, it seems that the impact on the information system is smaller. Yes, Cyril, I wanted to react because managing these vulnerabilities, sometimes we think about this VOC, Vulnerability Operations Center. It's a new acronym, of course. And a few years ago, there were some suppliers of managed services that were saying, we put the VOC in the SOC and we're selling you an integrated service. I must recognize that a few years ago, I wasn't convinced because I couldn't see synergies. And the first resellers in the market, they weren't really sure why they were putting these together. But it's really a trend that was started in the US, and they had grouped VOC and SOC. Today, if we think about everything that we've been saying so far on the need to react quickly and to react in a changing environment, I am convinced that VOC is really the malicious twin of the SOC. We can't really divide them, because when a vulnerability is coming out, it's not a security incident, but if a critical vulnerability is exposed, it becomes a security incident. So as we see that the delay between the publication of a vulnerability, sometimes zero-day not published, and the exploitation is smaller and smaller, obviously there's a need to keep the SOC and the management of vulnerabilities, so VOC, really close to each other, so that the processes of the VOC are connected. I even had to choose sometimes, and some of my colleagues said, no, you don't have the right to do this, but a critical vulnerability that's coming out and is exploited, I treat it as a security incident. And so, for example, Fortinet, they're quite active on vulnerability. It can be exploited, and we treat it as a security incident. So there is no incident when we're talking, but as long as we haven't remedied to this, we treat it as an incident. What does it mean? Patching without any delay, changing configurations, defining countermeasures without any delay, and depending on how serious it is and the vulnerability and the window of exposition. So the time between when the vulnerability was published and when we were able to mitigate it, we will see whether we have any compromise, traces of being compromised. So logs, suspect movements. Do we have some indicators on all these equipment to show us, on these assets, to show us that there have been some malicious activity? So these two, for me, we cannot divide them. And obviously, we can put them in different places in the organization, but they have to work hand in hand because it's really a need. So time is going by really fast, and we had too many questions, but I would like to finish on the human part, Farah, because we talk about automatization, and it's really important today, but since 2 years, we talk about re-internalizing. And the third level of the SOC, and it's quite an interesting element, both in terms of contextualizing alerts, in terms of the industry, which is really important to come closer to the skills. So what kind of organization can you recommend? Yes, the example that you give is a very good example of the room that's left, that is that of the human in the SOC, that of the knowledge of the work of the job, especially because we are having more and more SOCs that are really redirected towards the kind of profession like fraud and its management of cyber. And there are many other spots that the human is in, and we cannot replace it by automating. Even though automating is a virtue, and we've talked about it a lot, it shows also that the topic of SOC is opening up. And it also shows the left, shift left, and the shift left is really done with automation as well. But if we try to go into detail of the automation in SOC, it will touch upon one of the three missions of the SOC: the detection part, qualification investigation, or the response part. In the detection part, today it's important for a human that is knowledgeable to translate a use case, be it in a machine learning model or in an expert way or in a different way, but it's important to have some kind of a device that's a stacking of several use cases that experts, whether they know this, or they can see through an attack, then they've translated the tactics through use cases, and then they can implement this in the SOC. And obviously they're helped by the natural language processing to go faster, but we still have this expert. And I'm hoping that when I go out, someone will tell me, I have the technology that will not need this this description, where we won't need this ahead of time description of the threat. The only cases that we have these prior when we translate what is normal and we see what's deviating, and we say, oh, this has to be a threat. And this works on the OT systems, but it's much harder on the IT systems, perhaps in some very specific environments. In the qualification aspect, and here automation is like a police that is like cleaning the vegetables and so on, and is really checking the owner and helping with the decision making. And finally, the response part, where all the APIs and consoles, all the playbooks will be examined in their complexity by a human, and also supervised in their execution by a human. And it's true that the SOC, it's a company project, we've seen that, but it also allows to help people evolve within the SOC, to help them evolve in the N3, and also to keep them. So these professions are evolving, but we also have to train, but also keep our skills inside. Yes, perhaps one element of maturity in SOC has to be in two elements. It's process and human. So if we want to improve the process, but the human can't follow, we won't be able to do it. But if we improve the human, and if we improve also the process, but this will follow, because after the technological phase, as soon as a product or a technology arrives in its limits in terms of its team that is more mature, we will go beyond that. It's a part of our nature. But the human still remains key in terms of improving the SOC. Today, a maturity program, whether it's in terms of detection or response, we look at the human being and we say, okay, because the human being is 3 times better than when we started the SOC in terms of training and learning in field, so we know that the process can be improved and we can do even more. So we're coming to the end, and I'm happy to see this super huge room here, and I see there are many questions. Let's go to the conclusions. We looked behind us. Let's look towards the future in terms of evolution that you would like to see in terms of the future for the SOC. In a word, in terms of conclusion. SOC GPT? Oh, I knew it. Why not? Badr, the part that she mentioned, that SOC and VOC can be associated in a constructive way. It doesn't become a commercial approach or a marketing approach to ask for more money, essentially. It's really that we take the best of both worlds in terms of risk and exploitation and to create more precise use cases, reduce the time of detection and remediation. Cyril? I would say that we're continuing to go forward with SOC teams that have better capacities of operational intervention. And it's not because we always talk about experts in the intervention. So when we talk about intervention, it means that sometimes we stop the production. So it's really the speed of the cloud. There's a need to give operational capacity to the SOC that has to be done with the right level of learning and maturity, but to go further in this. Max.
What developments in the SOC do you see or wish to see in the future?
So what I see as of right now is basically the SOC will become more and more important because it will be deeper and more deeply integrated in all kinds of processes within the company outside of cyber as well. So if we look, for example, at the aspect of physical security, this is something that very often the SOC also needs to be at least aware about and know about, because there are things ongoing like social engineering attacks, which are also getting more frequent. And if you have someone trying to access your building with a fake badge, this should be triggered maybe also in the SOC side. Also, I think a huge development is that SOCs are also moving into the cloud, right, with their tools and systems, which makes them more resilient and more effective as well. So this is something that I also like to see. And the increase of bug bounty programs within companies is also something that is hugely effective for a SOC, because as the red team, the blue team, so to speak, trying to defend the company against the outsiders, the red teams, is helping them proactively ramping up the defenses and the security of the organization before the real attack happens. So this is also something where I'd say bug bounties is a future topic that also for a SOC needs to be more deeply integrated into. And what I really would like to wish to see is a more emphasis on the education and the training of analysts, security analysts that can be that can support the SOC in organizations from a university side of things, from schools, because I believe we still have a lack here of really knowledgeable people, trained people. And it's just so hugely important to have really good and really trained people here in the SOC that can really provide all of their insights on a technical level and also understand the business side of things. So this is something where what I would wish to see more education, more training.
Thank you, Max, for your wishes. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Don't move, please. Are there any questions? We have 1 minute left. Can we perhaps dare a question, or perhaps we'll wish you a good lunch? Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. It was really complete, and have a good lunch.